You are listening to Cemetery Confessions, the world's #1 goth talk podcast.
Hello and welcome back to Cemetery Confessions. This month we are chatting with Terri Kennedy, musician and founder of Ipso Facto. If you don't know, Ipso Facto is a California-based goth shop that opened in 1989, and they not only sell goth and alternative clothing and accessories, they hold concerts, performances, lectures, occult rituals, and a variety of other courses, creating a sort of constellation of community. Their longevity has made it something of a pillar in the scene, in my eyes. Few shops, clubs, zines, events, what have you, stick around for more than 5 years or so. And the few who manage to maintain their support and passion for goth hold a special place in my heart. I know I'll occasionally return to old goth magazines, and 80% of the fashion ads are now defunct shops or resellers who don't exist anymore, and it's always a mournful moment to experience that. It is hard to sustain a business, much less a business dedicated to a subculture. And when I conceived of this episode, that's where I thought we would go. Talk about the challenges of sustaining a goth-focused business and a community, and explore memories and changes in the scene over the past 34 years. And we did. Terri regaled us with stories and opinions on goth culture. But we also waded into discussions about the economy and feminism and music. And a trigger warning is necessary here because we discuss sexual assault as well toward the end of the episode. We close out the show with a track from Styrocene FX, one of Terri's many music projects, but this is something special because it's not available anywhere online, so I'm very excited to share that. I found the discussion to be engaging and intimate in its vulnerability, which I don't think happens often in these types of media modalities. The experience of this discussion was akin to late night house parties with good friends, or perhaps a stranger who you find you just have an affinity with. But with that introduction out of the way, let's get right in. Let's start with a bit of backstory so we can all get to know you. And I like to ask about first your earliest introduction to goth and where you kind of cut your teeth, so to speak, in the scene.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'm old. So when I was in high school, from 77 to 81, it was the punk scene that was happening, just starting. So I got into punk and I started listening to it in about 77. And by 79, there were at least 4 punks in my high school.
Wow.
And they all called me a poser. And of course, we all know the origin story from punk came goth. Mm-hmm. So that's why I'm going into punk, for those who are not familiar with that. And so, I was into everything from the Dead Kennedys, and my last name's Kennedy, so that's kind of ironic.
Yeah.
And also the darker side of punk, like Lydia Lunch, for instance, and certainly the Birthday Party were a huge influence on me. I got to see them in 83, I think it was.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
So that changed my life, seeing them and Lydia Lunch together.
Wow.
Really influenced me. I had already been experimenting with bands at that point. But in high school, I was just listening to stuff, and of course it was the new wave era. So we had Blondie and Pat Benatar. And I think I dressed probably a little bit like both of them. I was starting to make my own clothes early on. because I was a fat kid, so nothing fit me.
Mm-hmm.
And so my mom showed me how to sew when I was 7. And I started making clothes pretty early on, or altering things so that it wasn't too long for me. I would get hand-me-downs from my sister in the 60s, and they just didn't quite fit me right. I remember one time we were going to church, and they put me in this leatherette mini dress. And I sat down, and the thing came up to my crotch, and I'm like, Mom, do I have to wear this? Because I was chubby. So things fit me all wrong. Mm-hmm. So anyway, yeah, I had to start hemming my pants and just like making things that I like. So by high school, I was making a lot of clothes, and I was wearing a lot of vintage. That went with the punk scene, of course. It was all DIY. We didn't have Manic Panic yet. We didn't have, we had one punk store, London Exchange in Costa Mesa in Orange County, California, which is south of Los Angeles. Mm-hmm. And we would drive up to LA and go to all the punk stores on Melrose and stuff like that. And I went to shows like in the early 80s. I saw the Plasmatics and just the Ramones and like all these great bands, PIL. Yeah. And at that point, punk was morphing. I mean, it always was a great variety of different sounds. I mean, you had Per Ubu, who were just like this jazz punk, awesome. I got to see them live. Very cool. Just all this art punk stuff going on in LA, like all these parties where they would like burn a bunch of dolls and have you like it was Halloween. I remember this one art party. This guy, Father Larry, put on these great parties. It was like the South Base punk scene, and we were bobbed for doll parts in a baby carriage full of water. And people would break. Of course, the beginning of the club scene, what is now the rave scene, but people would break into abandoned buildings, set up parties, quote unquote. Oh, yeah. A DJ with his vinyl records and a generator would start. Would have a party, and if you showed up early, you got to help paint the abandoned garage or whatever it was, which was a great deal of fun. I went to a lot of the early goth clubs and a lot of the late punk clubs, like Lhasa Club, and just like, it was a lot of mix of things. There wasn't this delineation of like punk or goth. It was just all kind of all under one umbrella, but it was all different sounding.
Yeah.
So goth like came out of that, but really I wasn't aware of that term till like the late 80s because it wasn't called that. Yeah. We had deathrock, which I knew Eva O, I know her, and used to roadie for her band, the Superheroines, a few times, and would go to their shows and stuff. And it was, that scene was like the deathrock kind of sound because it wasn't like punk per se, but it was. But with darker elements.
Right.
And so out of that came goth. But goth came later. That term, I think, came from England. So when I heard that, it was like the late 80s. But we'd already had this element growing in our punk scene with the Superheroines and other bands. Christian Death, obviously. I knew Roz as well, and Jill and all those people. And Rick, of course, I've known since I was really young.
Oh, wow.
18, Rick Agnew.
Yeah.
Because he lives around here. And he's funny. He came to one of my house parties when my parents were out of town, like my punk house parties. And he held a hammer over my head and he said, "Would you go out with me?" He was in my garage. And my tall boyfriend was standing behind him and laughing his head off. Rick's a funny guy. I ran into him at a restaurant recently, and I was reminded of the time we were at the chicken pie shop and we all started a food fight. It was so funny. He's such a laugh.
Yeah, every interview I've seen of him has been fucking hilarious for sure.
Oh, God, the guy is great. And he's so inventive and so always on to the next thing,
Yeah.
Yeah, he's really cool. And so I guess, it sort of evolved as I evolved. And I was in bands from like the, early 80s onward. Most of them didn't make it out of the garage. And most of the people I was in bands with back then are now gone. So they have left this realm. There was a lot of heroin use in that scene. I
Yeah.
personally never partook, but it killed a lot of my friends. And what drug use didn't kill them? It was AIDS. You know, it was like my high school was decimated.
Yeah.
Right after high school, we lost a lot of people. And yeah, so it was quite the tumultuous scene. I mean, I'd come home and I was living with my parents till I was like 20, early 20s. And I'm like, Mom, Dad, I just went to a riot.
Yeah.
It was so cool, you know? GBH, and it was the Longshoremen's Hall. I forget what year that was, like 82 or something. Yeah. I thought it was so cool.
Yeah, well, yeah, it was. That does sound pretty cool.
Yeah. But, you know, I grew up my parents were very like conservative in the sense that they didn't want me going out. So I sometimes have to sneak out or get other people to drive because I didn't have a car until my early 20s. But yeah, you know, I'd find ways to get to shows. But mostly I was busy with college and, or, you know, just working. I was always working and going to school during the 80s, you know, until about 85. So I went to junior college for about 3 years and worked, you know, part-time in retail, banking, whatever jobs I could get. It was always, you know, mostly that kind of thing. And then I went to fashion design school. That's FITM in Orange County for 1 year because that's all the money I had saved from my odd jobs. And it was a 2-year program, but I couldn't finish it. But I did have a pretty good foundation there, pattern drafting and whatnot. And one of your questions I noticed was about how I got into fashion design. Well, I'd already been making my own clothes and experimenting with pattern drafting, which is, of course, a basic element you have to know to make clothes. And the school was definitely tough. That course was a 6-unit course. It was hard. So I didn't do that great in it, but I think I'm better now. I'm still utilizing that skill, you know, but I wasn't impressed with it academically. I thought the junior college was a lot better. I was very interested in anthropology, and I took every anthropology class that I could, and my teacher really got along with him, and he was disappointed when I told him I was transferring to a fashion design program. And he was like, no, you should go into this. I'm like, what am I going to be, digging in the ground or a teacher? And I'm an introvert, and I'm not really, as a teacher, I don't know how I would be. So it wasn't in my mind to do either of those things. And I just liked creating. I think my mantra, if you will, when I wake up is kind of, my mind is set to create something in the day, because creation to me is life. Yeah. And it doesn't matter if I'm just making my dinner or if I'm making clothes or jewelry or a window display. I feel like I'm compelled. And certainly music falls in that category, you know. Music's always been in my life. And yeah, I hope to continue, you know. Right now I'm on a hiatus of sorts just because keeping a shop running for 35 years is takes all my time.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah. But I hope to return to it. I have friends that I want to work with that want to work with me, but it's just time, you know, everybody's so busy.
Yeah.
But maybe I covered at least the first 4 questions.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we're going to pull some of that apart. I thought it was interesting actually hearing you talk about, I just read a paper. It was a guy in the UK who interviewed a bunch of UK goths about their experience in the 80s into the 90s. And there was a lot of parody with what you said and what they said about the sort of, you know, there was like a blend of like punk and new romantics and this kind of move toward something a little darker because of partially the behavior of punks at the time and just the desire for something more artistic and creative. And I haven't read the entirety of Phantoms, the LA Deathrock book, but you know, a lot of what you spoke to is echoed in there. And obviously there was a huge deathrock scene with like Castration Squad and, you know, we interviewed Edward Stapleton of Nervous Gender a few years ago, and, you know, the Bags and Pompeii 99 and all that stuff. It's just huge melting pot. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And there was this kind of tribal element too. I'm trying to remember some of them. I still have a lot of vinyl in my collection. Oh, I can't think of the names, but like with Stone 588, we had a very tribal drumming sound that we liked.
Mm.
And a lot of the bands I liked early on, definitely had that element where it was, and I still love like tribal music, like African drumming or Indian,
Oh,
you
sure.
know,
Yeah.
rhythms, that
I know
complicated
I know
scale.
Budgie tended to
Mhm.
gravitate towards a lot of that as a drummer as well.
Yeah, that stuff is great. The Creatures, I remember seeing them and was amazed. The drumming was excellent and so creative, the songs. I did a project with Tom of 45 Grade, the drummer. He and I did a project called Feast. Um, and we were trying to record some stuff over the pandemic to of that project. And it was, a good 20 years ago.
Hmm.
And he still had tapes of our practices. I think we only
Oh,
played
wow.
like one show, but it was cool. It was just vocals and drums. It was really cool. It kind of had like jazz elements and tribal elements, and it was really. And I have a lot of jazz influence
Okay.
because my parents were a lot older than most of my contemporaries'
Hmm.
parents. My father was in World War II,
Oh,
and
wow.
so they had me in their like mid 40s. So the big band music was really played in my house, besides liturgical music,
Right.
like all the Latin Ave Maria kind of stuff, which I grew up loving. But
Hmm.
yeah, like jazz and kind of what do they call it? A kind of dark, kind of sounding like torch music, I guess is the only way I can describe it.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Um,
your
Like
Billie
cabaret.
Holiday sort of
Oh,
stuff.
Yes, yeah, I
Yeah.
love Billie Holiday. Although I didn't hear her in my youth, but I heard a lot of big band, like and the Andrews Sisters,
Oh,
things
I
like
love the Andrews
that. I
Sisters. Yeah,
saw
they're
Les
great.
Brown and his band of renown with my dad at the fair one
Okay.
year, and I saw Gillespie, or yeah,
Oh, wow. Yeah.
yeah, at a Santa Monica Pier free concert one time. Um, And I love all that stuff too. It's so because it is freeing in a way that punk is, like there's no rules, you just do it.
yeah.
And my
Yep.
favorite thing to do is just jamming and recording. I don't like performing live. Like some people really enjoy the energy and all that. And to me, it's
Hmm.
just fraught with problems. Like you can't hear the band when you're the singer, or like
Hmm.
when they start playing one song and you're singing another one, or like
Yeah.
all these, or they don't pay you, or the audience
Oh,
hates
yeah.
you, or whatever. And it's like all these things go into it that don't have anything to do with the actual creation part of it. And it's just so frustrating sometimes. But just the act of creating, I love it. And I love jamming. I was in this Middle Eastern belly dancing band where I just sang like whatever came to my head,
Hmm.
and it worked. And we were doing like Middle Eastern medieval music too, where I learned a
Oh.
number of pieces phonetically. And it was difficult, but I'm glad,
Hmm.
Fern, if you're out there listening, that you put me through that, because it definitely, colored more of my experience and my um, what makes me a singer, to learn those kinds of things. And plus, I was in like chorale classes in high
Hmm.
school and grade school,
Hmm.
where I sing really, really, really high to a point where it's not really pleasant to listen to. So I started to stretch my range by singing with the boys to try to strengthen my lower register, because that's what
Hmm.
people want to hear. Um, and so I did that. I managed to get past 4 octaves, and I was really proud
Very
of
good.
myself back then.
Nice. Yeah.
But yeah, it's all education and practice, and playing with different people is very educational. They always teach me something. Um, so it's all, I'll do any kind of music. I've done crazy different things. I was in a reggae band for a little bit. So
Oh.
it's just whatever gets thrown at me and I'm interested, I'll try it out.
Yeah, I love that. Trey and I, especially Trey, are also fans of exploring different types of music and blending different types of music and finding novelty, I guess. Yeah.
Hmm.
Oh yeah. I mean, I don't know. There's something about folk music, like Greek and just different things, Russian, that is so cool to me. I love culture, I guess. And so
Yeah.
I'll watch like Turkish like romance dramas just to
Hmm.
hear the music, you know?
Yeah. Getting
And
into music from other cultures is usually one of my favorites because, I have this restless mind. I want to hear new sounds, new things, and there's only so much I can get from the Western tradition that I've been so steeped in that I have to go to a foreign culture to find something that really sparks my interest again.
yeah, I love the whole like the Norse infusion to like black metal or whatever, and
Oh,
those
yeah.
kind of acoustic bands that are like black metal. It's just so wild with traditional instruments.
Hmm. Yeah, I got into Scandinavian rock pretty heavily for a while.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I love all that. Anything that's different, throat singing, like all of that is just so cool.
Hmm.
I love hearing it, and it speaks to me on a spiritual level. I guess I just
Hmm.
love culture. It all comes from my interest in anthropology and languages, and just yeah, and traveling. Oh, I love to travel.
Have you tried picking
So,
up overtone singing as a technique? The throat
um,
singing?
no, I've tried it.
Yeah.
I've experimented with it, but I didn't let anyone listen to me. But definitely, you can tell that I like Middle Eastern singing because it comes out in some of the stuff I've done. Um, that kind of multi-note kind of,
Hmm.
style. Definitely. I was going to say when we were talking about jazz and stuff, I did sort of a torch project with my friend Tim Mag, who you may know from the band DI or the Cramps.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And he lives around the corner from me, and we do once in a while we'll get together and do something. But um, yeah, I did this thing where I was playing my accordion that I inherited from my grandfather and singing these torch songs that I had written, and it's really different, and it probably wouldn't please the all the fans out there, but it was something I felt like I wanted to do because I just love that. That's my natural. I fall into that kind of jazz torch kind of songwriting very easily.
Hmm.
Just making a dish in the kitchen, I'll start singing it. Like my life is kind of a musical in a silly way. I think of songs for each cat has its own theme song, you know.
Oh, I love
That's
that.
great. Yeah.
I really live music, and it's so sad about oh, I don't know how many years ago, 14 years ago, my husband lost his hearing, and he's a
Oh.
harpist.
Hmm.
Hmm.
So he no longer plays because even though he had a cochlear implant, he can't listen to music. It sounds like chaos. So it's kind
Hmm.
of upended our lives a bit
Yeah.
because he doesn't want to go to concerts anymore or clubs, you know.
Hmm.
But we used to sing together. It was really cool. But he's lucky to be alive, so I guess we can celebrate that. But life sure brings chaos.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Hmm.
Yeah. My wife has experienced a lot of health issues and chronic disabilities that have also, we used to go out a lot and do lots of things together, and now we can't really anymore, which is, you just got to figure out a new way of being, I guess, and how to incorporate that into your life. I will have to ask you afterwards to see if there are any other places I can listen to your music, because I did go through and listen to Stone 588 and
Uh-huh.
absolutely loved your voice. So if there's anything else I can listen to, I would be very interested in that.
Oh yeah, I've probably got some things on this computer I can play you. Yeah, I myself too have struggled with health issues. In '09, I was fighting breast cancer, which I
Hmm.
was able to, they caught it early and were able to surgically remove it. But
That's
it
good.
Yeah.
definitely changed my life.
Yeah.
I
Oh, yeah.
because they put me in early menopause, and then all these things came
Hmm.
about as a result, and my arthritis really ramped up after that. So now I
Yeah.
have to not I can't stand for 9 hours doing
Yeah.
retail like I used to,
Hmm.
Yeah.
without the pain. So
Yeah.
I have this adult beverage right now that helps me out a little bit. And
Yeah.
the creams, the full spectrum CBD creams do help.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, my wife uses a lot of weed for beyond her like medications as a treatment as well. So
Yeah, I've never smoked weed. I don't like smoking, but the creams and the tinctures are a godsend
yeah,
for pain. Oh my
yeah,
God. So yeah, I'm grateful that they're legal here anyway, sort of.
yeah. I
You
love
know.
the chaos gremlin energy of this interview so far. Let me ask, if it's okay with you, let me ask you a little bit about some fashion stuff.
Oh, sure, sure. The chaos of my direction of my conversation. I'm sorry.
No, it's
No,
fine. I
it's
love it.
great.
Yeah, it's good.
My mind is creative and it just goes where it wants to go, I guess.
Yeah.
And I'm not drunk, believe me. I've only had a third of this glass of Angry Orchard. They
Oh,
can send
yeah.
me a case if they want.
No, it's
Just
good. I have ADHD, so it definitely keeps the conversation engaging, jumping around like that. Did want to ask, just because you've had such a history with fashion, and I'm noticing some trends now,
mhm.
if what you've seen as far as, I guess, even not just now, but from the 90s to now, changes in trends and preferences in goth fashion and alternative fashion, what kind of was popular and went away and maybe came back and that kind of thing.
Well, I think the 70s has really kind of popped back up in the new goth, quote unquote, and new goth.
Mm-hmm.
Look with all the bell bottoms, and for curvy women, they're a godsend. I love those kind of pants, those leggings that are
Yeah.
bell bottoms, like the burnout velvet and all that. It reminds me of the 70s, which I lived through. And
That and the witchy occult
yeah,
fascination.
and those
Mm.
bell sleeves, like we used to have, I had
Yeah.
those when I was younger. So yeah, I think that the 70s certainly has an influence. I having a hard time putting my finger on 90s stuff, except for those buffalo check prints, which I can't stand. And like those little rubber necklaces. I mean, I don't know what is
Oh,
technically
yeah.
90,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
A lot of flannels too, thanks to
yeah,
grunge.
yeah, exactly. Buffalo check flannels, you name it. Yeah, I don't know if that's really fashion because it's like kind of working class attire that's
Mm-hmm.
it's I don't know, it's easy to wear, it's almost like to me fashion it takes more effort to make it fashion. It should anyway. Maybe if
Mm.
they took the buffalo check or the plaid or whatever and tartan, whatever you want to call it, and cut it up into something like Vivienne Westwood did,
Mhm.
like that was very inventive.
I think
I'm sure she couldn't do
it was more fashion from a social standpoint and from an identification with a style standpoint than a design standpoint.
yeah, I mean, it all influences, I think, because obviously designers get their cues from the street,
Right.
but also from history, for instance. There's so many places to draw influence. I mean, definitely I came up with some things that I saw later on in high fashion, and I was like, hey, I made a pair of I made a pair of lace pants in like the early 80s. And then like now everybody's seen lace bell bottom pants, but to me it was like nobody had this. I just came up with it. And like it's interesting to see that it's part of, mainstream sort of, or at least goth mainstream anyway,
Yeah.
fashion. But yeah, I think there's a big historical reference. There's a street reference. I mean, the unfinished seams, like that's kind of
Mm.
street,
Yeah.
or the visible seaming, like on the outside where they stitch it instead of under in the inside, and the ripped and distressed fabric, like that kind of stuff. It's
Yeah.
certainly street kind of style. That's and there's other things like I'm trying to think of. I mean, when you have certain necklines that are associated with different cultures, and
Hmm.
yeah, I mean, it's sort of. I don't even know if someone were to try to characterize the 2000s and fashion, like they would be like, well, they looked at this era in history and that era in history. It's like sort of
Mm.
recycled, which comes to the name of my store, Ipso
Yeah.
Facto,
Yeah.
of or by the facts. it refers back to a previous statement. And to me, that's fashion is cyclical. So, you have something from the past that's reinvented and recycled. And that's how I view fashion. So that's why I chose that name. And I was reading the ethnobiology of the Haitian zombie, and that word came up. And then I heard George Bush, who was president at the time, use it in a sentence.
Oh, really?
And I was like, there's a reason why I'm hearing this phrase all of a sudden. And so I, researched it more and felt it was appropriate.
Yeah, I love that. No, I'm also seeing a lot of, I don't know if you're seeing a lot of mall goth coming back again. Like a trip pants.
I don't know. What does that what are the elements of that? Just
it's kind of like a mix of like metal, grunge, and goth. So like at least from when I was because I started in 2000 in skate culture, yeah. So like the baggy
collars.
Yeah, I don't see too many collars, but
it's more the baggy clothes, really, really large straight leg, but wide
arm
leg
warmers.
Pants.
Oh, okay. I see, like trip pants and zippers and and chains, probably
chain wallets.
Yeah. I mean, that's always like, gosh, I can't think of a time when I didn't sell those, but it did kind of go away for a while.
Yeah.
And then it came back. And I remember there was a point where men didn't really wear like super tight pants, I guess during the 90s.
Yeah.
I don't know. And so like guys would come in and they're like, my girlfriend wants me to try this on. And they tried on, they're like, you can see my ass. And I'm like, now you know what we feel like.
I mean, that was one of the first jokes I heard when I was getting into goth was the best thing about being goth is that your boyfriend and girlfriend can share their skirts and their makeup together and, swap outfits. I'm still waiting for romantic goth to make a comeback because that was also really big when I was younger. And I wore a lot of Victorian, like neo-Victorian stuff for over a decade or more. And it doesn't seem like it has made a comeback, unfortunately, but who knows?
Still my favorite, but I just can't necessarily afford to buy all of that. And I don't have the talent to make it right now or the time.
Yeah, my closet's full of those things, but I can never wear it because it's too hot here.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I used to suffer in the heat when I was younger, but it's so much hotter that I honestly don't know when I'll wear all that stuff again.
Yeah, I had to start buying comfortable shoes recently because I was just wearing very old winkle pickers and pikes that were just killing my feet. And I'm like, I can't do this anymore.
I don't. My feet are permanently pointed, and I have the hammer toe from wearing winkle pickers so many years. Yeah, never again.
Yeah. I remember I used to go to music festivals for a week and wear these like 7-inch Demonia boots up hills and down. And I'm like, I would kill myself if I tried to do that now.
There's definitely a time for that, but when your back and your feet start to suffer. And I definitely don't use Aquanet anymore.
Yeah. Another thing I was curious about was the age range of customers, because I know I've seen in the last few years a lot of Gen Z getting into goth, whereas previously, not 6 or 10 years ago, I was hearing a lot of people complaining like, oh, when you go to the clubs, it's just everybody 40 and up. And it seems like that's changed, but I wonder if it's online more or if you're seeing it as well, because obviously you see people every day or most every day.
Well, my store, because it has like this pagan component and the goth component, and it's hard to separate like the two, but I'd say it seems like my page on Facebook and Instagram has like mostly women 25 to 35 is what it tells me, but age ranges. But I mean, we're right by a high school, the location of the physical store.
Oh, nice.
So the walk-in traffic is a lot of high school kids. And then on the weekends, it's more people from all over SoCal, And in the summer, we get people from neighboring states that are visiting Disneyland because we're only 5 miles from Disneyland. And that can be a variety of people. And just the other day, I had these ladies walk in, and I know they were older than me. They were probably in their 70s. And they were like, we're old lady goths. We love all this creepy stuff.
I love that.
In the 60s, there was this whole thing, with people that went to see Ozzy's band. Why am I blanking?
Black Sabbath.
Black Sabbath.
Thank you. Black Sabbath, yeah, and like capes and whatnot, And I know there was an element of that kind of scene, like kind of dressy, kind of medieval clothes.
I miss the capes. There was a time, maybe I don't know how many years ago, not too long ago, that dungeon synth became kind of popular, which was very similar in like style, but that didn't last for very long, at least.
No, that was a real flash in the pan in like the early 2010s, I think. Like 2012, 13, 14, somewhere in there.
Sounds like video game music.
It
kind
like
of.
Castlevania.
Yeah.
Castlevania.
Definitely has some Castlevania vibe.
It's very atmospheric. Yeah.
That's cool though.
Yeah. And it's cool too that you do have a wide range of ages coming in, because I've also been seeing a higher prevalence of goths that are like, oh yeah, my mom and dad are goth and I am too, and I'm like 18, 20, whatever.
That is very true.
I saw some echoes of that in the early 2000s, but it seems like it's picking up now, which is, I really love to see that. Oh yeah, I was going to ask, because you brought it up, do you get a lot of crossover between the goth and alternative stuff and the pagan stuff you do at the store, or are those two separate groups? And actually, you can even, if you want, talk about like the kinds of events you have at Ipso Facto, because you have a whole smorgasbord of things happening.
Yeah. I think it was probably in the 90s that I brought in the first tarot reader into the store. It was like mid 90s. And to me, it was just, well, my whole idea for Ipso Facto from the beginning was to have a salon. And I don't mean a hair salon for those listening.
Right. Like
but
the
you know
old
what I mean?
Parisian
like
salons.
Yeah, in the 14 to 1700s, they had this thing in Europe where the artists, the thinkers of the time, the politically charged people, and the wealthy would mix at people's homes or wherever at events where they could exchange ideas and be on the same social level, even though outside they were part of a different strata. And that idea always intrigued me because it really brought about social change in a big way in Europe. Because the rich people became aware of the plight of the poor, or artists, or whatever. And I felt that it was important to have different people exchange ideas in a safe setting and to talk about the taboo subjects like sex and politics and things that people always tell you to shut up at a party. At least they tell me, that I want to talk about. And I think it's important to talk about these things, or death, or whatever, And that was the whole idea behind my store. We had an art gallery in the beginning. We've always had events. And now we have a professor, like literally giving lectures on anthropology, history, mythology for the last, 8 years or so. And
that's really cool.
That is very cool, yeah.
And for me, I didn't finish my education. And I'm surrounded by PhDs. Like my husband has like 5 degrees at least. And he's still going for another one. And so I feel like I want to constantly still learn. I mean, learning is fun to me.
Yeah.
And so that's part of it. And I have friends that are experts in different things. And I'm like, well, sure, And so I have someone that teaches the witchy classes and someone, that does oracle reading and another person that does tarot classes. And, we just have all these different things. And the professor I was telling you about, Dr. Rietveld, and we've got quite a following for each of those things that they don't really cross. And especially, the pandemic, for good or ill, brought people together that were from all over the world. For us anyway. We have people coming to these lectures online that are from in Korea or Germany and, the UK regularly. So it's really interesting because then we get to ask them, well, what's it like over there? What do you do? What's popular? What's going on? What are the big topics of the day? And it just makes my little anthropological heart happy to learn this stuff straight from people. So I don't know if I answered your question.
No, you did. Yeah. No, and I love that too.
I just love culture and talking to people from different places. And like in person, I'm kind of shy, but I just love mixing with different kinds of people. And
right.
I mean, LA is such a melting pot. I mean, we have so many great cultures here. You can sample any cuisine you want, talk to whoever, different cultures, and tell me about your country. It's so fascinating and fun, and I think it's good. And so, yeah, we have different age groups. The lecture group is kind of older. We have a lot of teachers and PhDs and doctors in this group. So like high brain power going on there. And people, if they aren't PhDs, they should be. They're really smart. And, we have creative types. We have an art walk once a month in our city that we're part of. We have different artists, and they're fascinating to talk to. What inspires them? What things have their life experience that have caused them to create this expression? Because art is both not just creativity, but it's expression.
Yeah.
And so that's another group, like kind of the art nerds, if you will, or whatever. And they are mostly younger, than me, like 20s, 30s. And Goths, I mean, they're all ages, but like I said, being close to high school, they're mostly younger. I don't know. I'm not good at guessing ages, and people rarely know how old I am. So it's fortunate. But I don't know that it matters because young people impress me so much with their knowledge of politics. I learned so much from them. And like all these like little individual names for subsets of Goth, like I learned from people like you guys. And I'm like, I've heard of this, but I don't know what it is. Because somebody came up with the term, and I guess I'm not in their social circle, so I don't know, And we have our own terms for things, and I guess the internet like comes, is a way that people, show these different subsets, to the world, and we learn about them, you know.
The internet loves its taxonomies.
Yeah. But to me, like personally, I don't wake up every morning thinking I'm a woman who owns a business or some shit like that. Yeah. I'm a human, and I have masculine traits. I have feminine traits. I love me a Home Depot, I like, so I'm sawing wood and doing physical work and creating, things with power tools. And at the same time, I like sewing lace and, I don't know, and cooking and stuff. And my husband isn't into like typical things like Home Depot would provide, He's more into intellect and philosophy and religion, particularly. He studied like Eastern religions extensively.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we're a good fit. We're both air signs, but he's not into the yard work or building things like me. But it shouldn't matter. Like when I first got into punk and I wanted to buy my first guitar, I got this outrageous BC Rich metal guitar. Mm-hmm. And the guy selling it to me like, are you buying this for your boyfriend? I'm like, no, oh, I don't even have a boyfriend. I just want a guitar, And it was like, just thought I was unworthy of it.
Girls
I guess,
can't play guitar.
I'm not a great guitarist. But, there was this masculine element to, Guitar Center or whatever,
Yeah.
That fortunately the punk scene kind of exploded that. There were women all over the punk scene. And so I didn't have to fight for my place in it, like I would have in the rock scene or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
That's one good thing about it. I mean, you could try anything. I tried drums first. I tried guitar. I settled on singing because that was the thing I naturally did, but it's like I've played a lot of instruments, mostly terribly, but I've done it, and I'm not abashed about having tried it because why not,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, I think everybody should do that. Because music is just a natural expression and it's fun and it shouldn't be torturous or difficult,
Yeah.
I guess it depends on where you're your skills lie too, but I was never really given any formal training. And my father, I remember, tried to dissuade me from hanging out with musicians because they're all into, drugs and stuff. He remembers the old jazz days, and they used to go to speakeasies and all that stuff in the 40s. But, that's not really what I was after. I wasn't after drugs or whatever. I wanted to express myself, and some of the people I was hanging out with happened to do drugs, but
yeah,
it wasn't my thing, but it's just being with creative people. Sometimes creative people are vastly creative, but at the game of life, they're not really that good,
Mm-hmm.
That happens. Like the most genius people are sometimes hard to get along with, or they're still living at home with dad at age 50 or whatever.
Right.
But
well, it's
that's
hard
what life
to,
is.
Society's not built for them.
yeah, and it's sometimes hard to leverage that creative impulse to something that is sustaining of life,
The
as far
capitalist
as
marketplace.
getting getting your needs met, and
Yeah,
people
and
wanting your services.
I'm not criticizing those people. I know it's hard to find a place you can afford in California,
Yeah.
And my parents pretty much had to push me out of the house, but it's like it was so much easier in the 80s. I will be honest, as a quote unquote boomer, I will tell you it was so much easier in the 80s to find a job that you could live and have your own apartment. Like it was no problem for me. And I was just working, regular jobs. And now like a regular job won't cut it if you want to.
Not even close.
No.
Not even in a cheap area.
No, it's crazy. And so I feel bad for young people, and I understand why they're staying at home or moving back so they can go to school and get a degree or find skills, learn skills that they need to have so that they can, move on with their life, because it's really, really hard.
Well, yeah.
And I think we need to do a lot more to help them. I mean, I think Biden wanting to cancel student debt was brilliant, and too bad Congress won't agree. But things like that, like having the sword of Damocles over your head, the rest of your life. I mean, my husband only just paid off, some of his degrees. And it was like, God, it shouldn't be like that. And we need to, education is so vastly important for the electorate to be informed, for the first thing, and to, have a life, to be able to support yourself and family and whatnot. I don't know. It's a no-brainer to me, but I could go on.
No, I
You're
agree with you.
preaching to the choir.
There's a lot of the system is built to exploit the working class and atomize the working class and support the very rich and
the debt
no one
makes
else.
them a dependent class as well. They have to get a job because otherwise they starve. It's not, they don't have the luxury to pursue non-economically viable pursuits like self-edification and creative arts and things like that. They need to get in the grind so they don't die.
God help you if you're disabled. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's sad if people have to give up their artistic talents, to work some job that just kills their creative spirit. My dad told me he hated accounting, but that's what his job was.
Yeah.
He had been a professional golfer like in the 30s and was actually on the farm team for the Detroit Tigers baseball team. Okay. And then World War II drafted him at 17, and that was the end of his career. And so he became a greenskeeper after that, because his father was he built golf courses. Of course, that was a terrible time to try to build golf courses because the economy wasn't so great until the 50s, But yeah, he said, Terri, never have a job that you hate. And so he said he supported me, my parents did, in my quest for opening my business. And he helped me lay the tile that are in my store now.
Wow.
Yeah, and they didn't tell me I was crazy or anything. And I lived in a house with very frugal people. So I knew how to save money, how to DIY. And I learned all about like banking and accounting when I was like 7, So I guess I was given the skills by my parents to a certain extent, and the mindset to not go crazy and spend money just because you have a line of credit.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, that's a skill set that's important to teach young. Yeah, I
Yeah.
was lucky to get it as well, but I know many friends who, made those mistakes early on because they weren't taught that young, and they're still trying to pay for it.
Yeah, it's really sad. But I think they should teach that to like fifth graders or something, like
Yeah.
civics, like,
Hmm.
okay, here's how our government works, here's how credit and the economy works. And yeah, I used to read economy books just for fun to find out how the world global economy was going to work, because that was emerging when I was like in the 70s, when I was a kid. And
Yeah.
things like All the President's Men and Nixon, all that stuff. I just read everything I could about it, because it was fascinating to me to see how the world was formed, and the alliances and why we have alliances with certain countries and things like that, which underpins our economy, to a certain extent.
Oh, absolutely underpins it to a huge extent.
Yeah. And of course, the whole thing with you live in an oligopoly, as they've coined the term
Yeah.
now. It's not just an oligarchy or monopoly; it's an oligopoly. We just don't have we can't pick our cable company. We get a choice of one,
Yeah.
Hmm.
maybe two.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's there are a lot more strikes happening now, a lot more unions forming
Mhm.
now, which is a step in the right direction at least.
It is. They haven't had a lot of traction yet, but
No.
here's hoping.
Yeah, I have a friend who does retouching for Paramount, and she just got laid off. She said it's temporary, but whew, sad. And I'm sure a
Yeah.
lot of actors and writers, are struggling right now because of the strike. Although I
Hmm.
believe in the plight of the worker, and they certainly have not been paid what they deserve or given the rights. And this whole thing with AI is a component, apparently, with actors.
Oh
If
yeah.
they
Yeah.
hire you and then they use your likeness, like they have it on film, then they can just make copies of it in the future to put in film instead of hiring you. And so
Yeah.
that's one of the things on the docket of their
Mm.
disagreement, I guess.
Yeah, the industry is really getting scared about that as actually voice actors,
Uh-huh.
because it's
Yeah.
it's even easier to emulate somebody's voice and then feed it random text.
They're very good now.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is the saying? Something like when the people have nothing to eat, they will eat the rich. Something like that.
Yeah, that is
Yeah.
a saying.
Let's do it. So I guess we can kind of stay on the political side of things since we're already there. I did want to ask you about the aspect of, obviously you're a woman-owned business. In your experience in the goth community, if you feel like it is set up to empower women or if it's also plagued by patriarchal systems that are reproduced in the subcultural space.
Well, I think our society is still very patriarchal, but
Hmm.
I think in the scene, I don't think the scene has been, anyway negative to women or their contributions. As I said, the punk scene, which of course birthed the goth scene, women were very much a part of that scene, and I think it carried over to goth. I mean, many of the clubs I've been to, and there's many women fronted bands, and so I don't feel I've been discriminated against, in the goth scene, but in the world at large, sure.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes it's a blessing, and sometimes it's people underestimate you. It just depends on what their agenda is. I remember there was a time when I got a job because the boss who was hiring walked behind me and looked down my top.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
boobies, you got me a job today. Thanks. When you're desperate for a job, anything goes, right? But now, with Me Too and everything, I'm like, that was appalling. Why did I put up with that?
Yeah.
You know?
Well, it's a power dynamic,
But
right?
it was the way things were. Yeah.
there's the shifting of norms. So it wasn't weird back then because that's just what you expected. So it wasn't as much of an affront as it is today when the norm has shifted so far away from that it becomes a death knell almost.
hmm I mean, I will tell you that in the punk scene, particularly when I had short hair, and I was very gender fluid. I would wear men's clothes sometimes. And I did that because I guess, when you go to clubs, women are all gold. And I didn't like that. It made me feel slimy.
Mm-hmm.
And
With an undertone of
a lot of
violence.
people would
Yeah.
stop me just walking to work or whatever, somewhere on the street. Are you a girl or a guy?
Why does it
And I
matter
thought
to
that
you?
was odd. And in a way, I kind of liked it because it was challenging people to try to figure out what I was.
Yeah, that's what I enjoy with it. I like to play with gender that way as well, to make people actually have to engage with it instead of just falling back on generic stereotyping and assumptions. Yeah, make it just abstract enough that people have to stop and actually think about boys and girls for a minute instead of just boy, girl, boy, girl, boy, and they're just have to actually engage with the concept.
Yeah. I mean, you have a question on here about sizing and dividing up clothes into male and female. Well, now we will have to admit that the cut of women's pants is lower waisted than men's. And the women's clothes have darts near the bust to allow for dress.
Right.
So jackets and tops fit differently. But we let guys try on women's clothes all the time. We don't care. But we tell them, okay, we have, women's pants here, men's pants here, just so you know how they're going to fit different. Obviously, men's pants are cut bigger. So if they're looking for some pants, obviously women can look at the men's pants, and if they like that baggy look or the higher waist or whatever. And, the hips aren't too big a problem because for women, our hips stick out more. There's physical differences. But as far as who wears it, I don't care.
Yeah.
I've done a couple of transformations, guys that came in and never worn women's clothing before. And, it was quite a good experience, a moving experience for me to do that for someone.
Yeah. I know, like if I buy a woman's top, the shoulders are going to be too small. If I have to go by measurements, right? And it's, there's a whole, I guess it's a bell curve as far as body types, because there are men with breasts, not like trans men necessarily, but anybody, and men that are slighter or, so it is, I tend to like just going by measurements generally, but.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as we get older, things change.
Yeah.
For good or ill.
Yeah. I know when I was getting into goth was talked about as a feminine community. So I kind of had that expectation going in as sort of like a subversion to male dominated culture. I think my issue now is more, I don't think women of color have as much subcultural capital. I think a lot of people are talking about anti-racism in the scene.
Yeah.
But I think generally in the goth scene, women of color are still more relegated to asking for opportunities instead of actually having an ownership of things, asking for representation or asking to book more bands of color or asking to be part of an event instead of having ownership over those things. And I think, so one of my main issues that I always harp on is this tendency of goths to take their status as outsiders or weirdos as license to think that they are enlightened and progressive, even if they aren't. And there's a theory I ran into the other day called race to innocence, which is the person who coined that was Mary Louise Fellows. And it was in the context of white feminists in multiracial feminist spaces, essentially having white women talk about systems that oppress them as the only ones worth fighting for, while ignoring other systems of oppression that benefit them, and kind of assuming like all women have a shared experience without acknowledging Black women or trans women or poor women have unique oppressions that like a cis middle class woman wouldn't. And so I kind of see that more broadly among white goths doing a similar thing where they laser focus on their own struggle in society as a way to be like claim solidarity and empathy without actually examining the way their privilege plays into oppressive systems.
Mm-hmm.
And so that bums me out, but I do see a lot, especially Gen Z, talking about these issues and trying to make that conversation more of a element of goth, because I know when I got into goth, it was very much a like intellectual kind of thing. And so people were talking about spirituality and reading Gothic literature, and a lot of the issues you talked about in the idea for Ipso Facto. And I think we kind of got away from that, and these had leaned toward almost like an apolitical thing or a neoliberal thing. And obviously goth is a diverse, heterogeneous collection of people, but I do think bands are getting more political and people are talking about these issues more, and I really like to see that, because I do think there are problems still. But
yeah, I mean, I'm always learning, and I'm seeing more and more people of color in the goth scene, which makes me happy. And they bring their own thing to it, like anyone would. And as far as like how I can only perceive the world through my eyes. I mean, honestly, I don't have their experience. So I am glad that people are talking about this so that we can know about it. I don't think I'm an expert on feminism or somebody else's life. When I hear people talking authoritatively about it that aren't a person of color, and it's like, let them speak, And I would say they would be the ones who would be able to speak most definitively about it.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't dare assume that I know what their life is like,
I did want to ask about fast fashion as well, because that's been a big topic of discussion the last couple years, I think. And just, how do you feel about those companies and their place in goth and in general, I guess?
Yeah. Well, obviously, as someone who loves the earth, I guess is the best way to say it, nature, and is appalled by the disruption of nature and the desecration of, Gaia. The idea of like just making like from conception to product in 3 months or less is crazy. I know they want to get it out there, but I know also that, conditions in the workplace in China, where many products that I sell are from, are not good.
Yeah.
And I try to buy as much local product as I can. But to be honest, with the internet and the competition from my own suppliers, my prices are not going to be like the ones that kids are finding, on, like Sheen, however you say it.
Yeah,
or
Shine, but whatever.
Yeah, Shine, however you
I've
say
heard
it. Yeah.
Shein.
Temu and
Yeah.
Alibaba,
Yeah. And I looked at
and
that
all of
site and
those.
I'm like, how can you sell a dress like that for like $20 or $16?
I mean, they
like
have
you couldn't pay me to make that
slave labor, basically.
for that little.
Yeah.
My heart breaks, and I know that people who come in, my clients, can't afford $100 dress. And so I always try to have price points at different places. I have necklaces under $9.50 for people that only have $10 in their pocket. I have, expensive items. I have middle of the road items. We have high quality, and we have medium quality stuff. We try not to have terrible quality stuff, because I know what good quality is, being that I know about construction of clothing, but it's like trying to please the customers quest for the cheapest thing, which many people have that just because they don't have enough money. And then have this other situation where, people are exploited in other countries. As a Libra, I see both sides. And it's very hard for me to say, oh, I won't carry anything that's, made in China. Well, I hope someday I can say that if China, unless they change their policies about how people are treated, and the environment in which things are made. But, I believe in quality, and I don't see things as much quality product out there now as I did back 15, 20 years ago.
I agree with that. Yeah. It seemed like there were a lot more, or there was a lot more emphasis on buying from individual creators, like one or two people that had their own thing in the scene, instead of these larger companies that are outsourcing. Like I know I would buy, I would save up and get some stuff from like Dark Angel Co. Which is like very good quality, has lasted me. I have stuff from like 20 years ago that still looks great. But you can get something online that's looks similar and is going to fall apart in 5 years probably. Which actually, this made me think of Trey made me aware of this Terry Pratchett's boot theory, which is kind of talking to that complexity you were talking about, which is, I wrote it down. He basically said a man who could afford $50 had a pair of boots that would still be keeping his feet dry in 10 years' time, when a poor man who could only afford cheap boots would have spent hundreds of dollars on boots in the same time and would still have wet feet.
Yeah. My husband loves Terry Pratchett.
Who doesn't?
Yeah, it's expensive to be poor, as somebody said. I don't know who. It's very true. And I myself, my employees make more money than I do. I'll be honest. I'm doing this thing because I love it and because I can live on $1,000 a month if I have to.
What are you, some kind of communist?
And it sounds nuts, but I do. But at the same time, I want to employ my 2 employees, and I celebrate the idea of bringing up the minimum wage, but it makes having a shop very unprofitable, But I believe in it enough to make my own sacrifices. And I guess that's all I can do is provide work for 2 people and all the other companies I buy from, and, provide a place for people to come and buy stuff and be a part of my community, that I'm trying to sustain in my little like ecosystem. But at the same time, there's bigger problems in the world, and I'm not sure what the answer is, I really don't know what to tell you. It pains me to think about it. Those poor people,
I am kind of a believer in the Marxist sort of like workers should own the means of production rather than all of the profit going to, the boss stealing your labor's worth kind of thing. But that is a big systemic issue that will take a lot of people over a long period of time to change. So you kind of can only do what you can do. I
have a lot of consignees that bring in stuff that they make, and I sell for them, on consignment. And I try to encourage that, and I buy a lot of things from people on, Etsy and whatnot, like small companies too.
Yeah,
but
I love
with
that.
Clothing from design to production is such an expensive undertaking. Like I've done it myself, done like t-shirts and stuff. Like, no, I don't mean printing, but like striped t-shirts or whatever. And I tell you, man, it's a lot of work and it's a lot of cost up front. So I can see how hard it is for small companies to, put out a line and do wholesale like that I could buy from.
Yeah.
It's really hard because your bottom line is your margin's so thin.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, I think in Goth too, we kind of, there's also some work to do with it's not the main issue, but there is some romanticization from like influencers who are like, oh, look, I have a million different outfits, instead of an emphasis on, save up for a couple quality things where your money is going into the scene and you know who made it and you know how much time went into it, and not feel like you have to have a different outfit every single time you go outside. Because even that too, I think, can push younger people into feeling like, or into going into a lot of debt, because they feel like they have to own all of these things immediately in order to be goth enough or to be liked. And I think that's kind of a problem.
Yeah, I mean, that's been the underlying problem with sort of the fashion industry for a long time, is that it's got this idea that, this is in season this month and this is in season next month. And it's this constant cycling of seasonal changes. So there is the aspect of you can't be seen in the same outfit twice. That's a plague on women's fashion primarily, because men don't really have that as much. But there's also the idea of seasonal looks and that constant churning of those looks that keeps the fashion industry in business, keeps the creative juices flowing for designers and whatnot, but also fuels the concepts behind things like fast fashion, because that's the only way you can keep up with that sort of thing, is if you can buy something cheap, wear it once, can't wear it again because that's taboo, and it's out of fashion anyways. So got to buy another cheap thing, and you just churn.
Yeah, I think some people ask me, like, you own a store, so you probably have a lot of clothes. Now, I have a lot of clothes that I made over the last 30 years. And I tend to sell off stuff if I don't wear it anymore in the store. But I don't really buy a lot of my own product. And I don't feel the need to buy new outfits all the time. Even when I was doing performing, I would make stuff, and I have a ton of fabric. And it's just, to me, I never understood that. You're right. It's very ecologically immoral to try to have that many clothes and then, wear it once. I don't understand that mindset. We're talking about consumerism, of course.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And it, to a broader scale, we don't need a new car every 5 years. I'm driving the same 20-year-old plus Toyota, and it works fine. And I'm okay with it. Yeah. And the bumper fell off, but I'm okay with it. It's a car. It's not like an extension of my genitalia or something. Right. And my house is always in a state of cleaning and fixing up, and I'm okay with that. We don't have to be perfect. We don't have to buy the latest gadget. There's a few things I spend money on because I use them regularly, like blenders, because I juice. But there's, and I recycle. Oh my God, I'm infamous. So I don't buy. I was telling we have this county tax where you are taxed on the value of your company's assets. So I have fixtures from 30 years ago that I still use. So I'm no longer taxed on those because they depreciate and, they don't tax them anymore. But I'm like, what am I taxed on? I'm asking the lady on the phone, and she's like, well, your paper, your printer paper, or your envelopes. And I'm like, I don't buy that. I recycle that. She's like getting angry with me because I have nothing to do. I don't know. To me, I thought it was kind of funny because I was taught by my parents, you don't throw out tin foil, you wash it and use it again.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm a dinosaur in this, but I just don't throw anything away.
Yeah.
And, if I need it later on, I'm like, oh, I have exactly what you mean. I'll pull out this piece of metal or whatever that we need to fix something in the shop or whatever. It just makes sense to me. So from that sense, I guess it's maybe a generational thing, but buy quality for life.
With the cost of living, I think that's going to happen again at this point.
Yeah, we're cycling back into that. I think your frugality came out of coming from children coming out of the being a child of the Great Depression, generation.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, we're kind of going back into something like that. So there's going to be future generations, or we may already be looking at future generations that are seeing that need.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you have to. But if you're like a person, our society in California is very transient. I mean, people move all the time for jobs and whatnot. So you can't keep your stuff, you know, if you move across the country or whatever, you can't keep everything. And I understand that. You know, I bought quite a few things from people moving that was like really great deals, you know, but I haven't moved far from where I'm from, Huntington Beach, and I live in Fullerton, which is, you know, 40 miles. I've lived in LA too, but you know, it's like I haven't moved that far. And I have most of my parents' furniture from the 50s that we sit on. And I have one stereo that I purchased when I was in high school that I still use. I've never bought another stereo. It's just weird, you know. I think I've taken frugality to an art, perhaps.
I love it.
Yeah.
I don't know. And I'm not saying it's the thing for everyone, but that's just my go-to. You know, my parents were not wealthy. We had a one income, and it wasn't very much income, but they managed to make things work, you know. And if our fridge broke down, we lived out of the cooler until my dad's salary could catch up to the cost of a fridge.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And he said, never go into debt, Terri. So I never have. You know, you just spend what you have and don't spend it when you don't have it. And I don't know. I guess that's a crazy notion these days.
Well, I'm going to switch topics a little bit. Something Trey brought up was another thing I wanted to ask you about, which is the fashion industry at large. I was curious if you have opinions on the use of goth on the runway and in high fashion, and if you think that has an impact on, or how it has an impact on, like street, you know, goth clothing and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I saw like Grimes at the Met Gala, and she was wearing this fabulous goth looking outfit. I'm like, cool. I like shared her picture, you know, on Facebook or whatever, because I thought it was so neat. I think it's great. I mean, if they high fashion wants to borrow from goth, that's fine. I mean, to me, like the expansion of the appreciation of the goth look, even if it comes without the appreciation of the music, unfortunately. For me, you know, people that want to look goth but don't listen to the music, I'll still sell stuff to them, you know, why not?
Yeah.
But, you know, to me, the scene is obviously, you know, music and fashion and all these other pursuits like art and writing and, you know, whatever, theater even, you know, literature, everything. I mean, culture. It's a culture. It's not just music, or it's not just fashion.
No, I completely agree. Yeah.
Yeah. But, you know, sure. I love that Wednesday is so popular, you know, that show. And What We Do in the Shadows is so popular. I love it. You know, I think that it just sustains the scene. You know, it brings in people that maybe aren't necessarily familiar with the bands, but they might become. So, you know, they might find a band that they're enamored with. And, you know, it'll all fuel future generations. I'm not a gatekeeper. I'm not going to tell people what goth is or isn't. Although privately, sometimes I wonder about some things, but I want to embrace new people that come in. I want them to feel comfortable and not feel like we're all stuck up, because that's the impression a lot of people get, you know. The finely dressed goths are like, you know, imperious and looking down their nose at them. And I try to be approachable and encouraging people, because my business depends on it, but also because I think the scene will die without new people, you know.
Yeah, I like the scene to be a space that people can play with identity and aesthetic and all that, you know, within parameters based on the sort of dark macabre aesthetic, I guess. But still, it should be not so rigid and defined, like you have to have this look. It's not a uniform based subculture. It's a subculture of expression and creativity and play.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, still, you know, you hear about, okay, is this band goth or isn't it? You know, like,
That'll
I
never
don't think
end.
so, but if they like it, okay.
Yeah. I mean,
Because, you know, we all have our own opinions about what we like, but
yeah.
it's not fair to like try to dissuade people from being part of the scene just because they like a band that isn't. Because obviously we all enjoy other kinds of music, you know.
Yeah. And everybody starts
It shouldn't
somewhere.
be, yeah, it shouldn't be exclusively one, you know, style of music that we listen to. Because we live in a society where everything exists. So
Yeah.
just
I,
enjoy what you like, you know.
yeah. I will try and talk with people about, well, if you like this, maybe you should check this band out, because I do
Mm-hmm.
still think the music aspect and the community aspect is imperative for, you mentioned like we need new people coming into the scene for it to continue on. But I also think the members of the community need to support the bands and the events, or start their own events and that kind of thing in order to perpetuate the scene as well. Because if we're all terminally online or, just playing fashion show, I don't
Mm-hmm.
think it really survives. I don't have any concerns about it. I think there's a lot of great discussion about music and centering community and integrating all of those different aspects together. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I will try and push people to say, hey, check out this band, go see this show, buy their album, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and that's even more important nowadays because you
Mm-hmm.
don't have to spend as much money. You don't have to give as much money to a band to enjoy their music these days.
Oh
You
yeah,
can get it
streaming
on
and
streaming, YouTube, and
mhm.
wherever. Even taking piracy aside, and that's kind of fallen by the wayside anyways, because streaming has
Yeah.
become very seamless and you know a well lubricated industry that doesn't have a lot of barriers to entry. So yes, you're paying a little bit of money, but it's such a pathetic amount in general that goes to the actual creative individuals, and it's
I
more paying
know.
for the infrastructure that supports the
Yeah.
dispersion of that music rather than the creation of it.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it's sort of, I mean, I can appreciate the pirate party. I'm sure you've heard about this. It started in Germany.
Oh yeah,
I
I'm very
know
familiar with them.
like Bruno from Dossik is part of it. And I
Oh yeah, I
enjoyed
forgot about that.
reading posts about it because, you know, he was saying, yes, you know, we shouldn't block people from accessing streaming because it's just how things are now, you know. I don't know exactly how he said it, but that's the position of the party. It was like, you know, you can't punish people for downloading things. You can't, that's not going to get you a fan or, you know,
Hmm.
not going to do
There,
anything because it's so prevalent and you can't stop it.
there was an interesting, if disheartening, point I heard somebody make in an interview about the music industry and the incentives of the music industry. Because in the past, when they were, you know, releasing physical product, whether they're tapes, vinyl, CD, 8-track, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
what they would want is the the publishing company, the labels would want to push the artists, would want to encourage the artists to produce more work so they can sell more product.
Mm-hmm.
And there's an alignment of incentive there where the artist wants to create more to make more money. The label wants them to create more so they can sell more to make more money. Whereas in
Mm-hmm.
the age of streaming, for streaming companies, for a Spotify, a YouTube, a whatever, their ideal customer is someone who pays for the service and doesn't listen to the music.
Huh.
They just pay for the
Oh
service
sure, yeah.
because they're not using the bandwidth.
Yeah.
They're still paying the monthly amount. So there's now this disjunction between the incentive of the distribution channel and the
Mm-hmm.
incentive of the production channel, whereas before they were in alignment. And I think that's
Mm-hmm.
kind of a scary concept for me to think of.
It is, yeah. I'm not quite sure how I feel about that because I know our music's on there somewhere, you know, on iTunes and whatnot.
Yeah.
I,
Well, I did
yeah,
listen to Stone 588 on Spotify, so that's
mhm,
definitely
As
up.
did
yeah,
I.
Yeah.
yeah, uh, Yeah, it's what can you do? You know, it's out there. And I guess, you know, the way bands make money now is t-shirts and touring.
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of the onus has gone back on the bands. You can't rely
Yeah.
on the distribution channels to push your product. You have
Hmm.
to, unfortunately, do that legwork, all that groundwork of establishing community, getting a fan base, maintaining fan clubs, and getting people to come to shows, buy your merch, all
Hmm.
that stuff, because the distribution channel is just no longer incentivized to do that. They want your product, they want you to be on their service so they can use that as a point of advertisement. We have such and such, or we have these many millions of different albums, but they don't actually care if, other than as an advertising, they don't actually care whether people are consuming your product as long as they're paying the fee to have just the access to it.
Hmm. Yeah. What a world.
I did want to ask, I guess I feel like I couldn't not ask because I read in another interview you did that you mentioned that you roadied with Shadow Project. I was just interested because obviously a lot of people have written and talked about the relationship with Roz and Eva O and like all the stuff that the performance art and the substances and things they got up to. So I had to ask if there were any specific memories or stories that you could share because I'd love to hear that.
I guess one time my boyfriend at the time and I went up to San Francisco where Eva and Roz were living after they'd gotten married. And we just went to the Exploratorium, you know, that museum where you get to play with all these
Oh yeah.
scientific
Yeah,
experiments.
no, that's a fun museum. It's a
Yeah, and
lot of
we had a
fun.
great time there. I have a picture of us standing around outside,
Oh
and
wow.
it reminded me that was the first time I met Roz.
Oh wow. Okay.
Went to their place and walked in, and he's like, "Hey, I'm making veggie tacos. You want some?" I'm like, "Sure," because I don't eat meat too, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
And so that was like him to me. He was like friendly, funny, you know. Like I wasn't a part of like the drug aspect or whatever
Hmm.
you know, that people talk about their touring practices, what they did on tour, all the things they got up to, supposedly. I don't know. I don't know about that. You know, they stayed at my house a few times and just were chill, you know, and I don't know, you know, we bonded over music and movies, like cult films. And I mean, you know, he was really funny though, Roz was. I found him very funny. We went to the first Shadow Project show. It was in Pomona. And
Yeah.
yeah, this was when right before Hole became a band. And so
Okay.
yeah, she was there and you know,
Hmm.
Jill was working with her on that band. But originally, yeah, like yeah, I guess she was in Shadow Project or whatever. And then she wasn't because she wanted to sing all the time.
I think I also
Yeah,
read that
you
in
know
a
who I'm
book.
talking about.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and but that's what they told me. You know, I met her. She was like, "Hey," but Jill and Eva and Roz were always really friendly and fun to be around. And Jill is a really good artist. But yeah, that was a fun show. It was cool. It was like an art scene, kind of an art gallery where they played.
Oh,
I like stuff like that that
yeah.
combines music and art.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I wasn't privy to like all the parties. In fact, we sort of stopped getting invited parties because we weren't users of certain products.
Right, yeah.
And so we weren't cool enough, I guess. And it wasn't them, but it was like the people that ran that house or
Yeah.
that lived
Yeah.
there.
No, I definitely understand that as someone who doesn't
Yeah.
really follow the prescriptions of, but lives more or less a straight edge life,
Yeah. I mean,
don't get invited to those things because they want someone who's going to party.
right. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
don't
wouldn't
harsh
be
my vibe.
bringing anything to share or whatever.
Yeah.
In fact, I think the reason that a lot of people have me around in the punk scene with all the drug use was that I was the one who could wake them up if they,
Oh,
you
yeah.
know, overdosed, which
Oh
I
yeah.
Yeah.
No,
did
I've
on occasion. And, you know, or I was designated driver or whatever,
Yep.
So we're useful.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, I won't say
Quite a
I never
responsibility,
did a
though.
drug, but I
It
just
is.
wasn't into it, and I did it once and I'm like, okay, cool. I don't need this
Yeah.
experience again.
Yeah.
I didn't do heroin, mind you. It was like
That's
LSD.
good. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
no, I would never inject any. I was really like always brought up, I guess from the 60s, like natural. Like I never got pierced or tattooed. I'm like, I got enough holes in my body. I'm fine with it.
Yeah.
I'm really fine with just my natural hair. And I mean, just, I don't know. There's something about all that I just don't feel the need to do, but I respect other people that do it. If it's an artistic expression, they're
Mhm.
expressing themselves, of course. It's great.
Yeah, my
But,
attitude's almost identical, where I definitely support however you want to modify your body, but I'm happy with my body as it is and don't feel the need to alter it in any sort of permanent way.
yeah, yeah. And I don't want to end up like obviously a lot of people overdosed. And I was just always worried about my health. My mother was really sickly and I nursed her since I was 5. She was
Hmm.
always sick in bed with one or the other thing. And she was deaf as well. And just, I knew how important the body was to having a good life,
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
being healthy. And I never got into fast food. We didn't have like chips in our house,
Hmm.
practically nothing like sodas, nothing like that.
Hmm.
So I just didn't grow up liking it. I've never really got into that. I like, just water and green tea and the occasional adult beverage, but
Hmm.
it's not like I don't like fast food. I like good quality food.
Yeah.
Just, I don't know. And I like making stuff. I've always been able to make stuff for myself and others. And even when I was broke, I'd figure out, making spaghetti last all week or whatever, but just wow, just the idea that you have to get fast food for every meal will get awfully expensive
Oh,
and it's
yeah.
not good. And I don't want to have my heart get, clogged or whatever. And they tell me I'm pretty healthy other than the arthritis. So that's a good thing.
There are definitely issues of like food deserts and that kind of thing where people don't have access to healthy
Mm-hmm.
food, which is a problem. But again, it's back to the system built to oppress the, minorities.
Yeah, I totally understand that. We're growing our own food right now, although we're not in a food desert by any stretch of the imagination. But yeah, I understand that. Like, especially after the riots in LA, like grocery stores moved out. People had
Mm,
like grannies had no way to get to the distant store that was selling food. And it was awful. I mean, it is still that way in many places in South Central. And they're just starting to come back. And you have to rely on bodegas and the higher prices and whatnot.
yeah.
Yeah.
It is good to learn to how to, if you're able to grow your own food. Like I know William Faith, who's in Chicago now, does
Mm-hmm.
a permaculture
Permaculture.
class.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Xeriscaping or something.
Yeah. I wish more of that stuff did carry over from punk rock to goth.
Did you know I toured with him?
I didn't, but I'm not
I mean,
surprised.
he toured with everybody in that scene, so that absolutely doesn't
Yeah.
surprise me.
Yes. So the first tour for Faith and the Muse, they asked me to be the backing vocalist.
Oh,
Oh,
And
wow.
fantastic.
Awesome.
they did not know me. It was Jeremy from Element and all the other bands he's in. Um, he was in London After Midnight and stuff.
Oh, okay.
He's the one who told them to get in touch with me. And so I went on that tour, a procession tour, and it had Faith and the Muse, and it had Rosetta Stone,
Oh, excellent.
and Corpus Delicti.
Ooh,
Yeah,
That would have
so
been
that was
really
that is
nice.
a hell of
cool.
a tour.
I
Yeah.
mean, I've seen Faith in the Music a couple of times live, but not on that tour because I definitely didn't see them. I don't remember who was opening for them, but I think I saw them once in Chicago and once in St. Louis. But definitely haven't seen Rosetta Stone or Corpus Delicti. And I would love to see Corpus Delicti.
They're amazing. Such great people too. They're touring now,
Oh, definitely
but
have to look that
without the
up.
original drummer. She's not touring with them. I guess she her hand, she said she can't do it anymore.
Hmm.
Things like that. What I read, I'm not in touch with them recently, but they were lovely people, all of them, just lovely people. Although I was in my mid 30s and I could not sleep on floors. Some of the places we slept were a little rough, and I wasn't
Mhm.
used to that kind of life, you know. And but no, it was great. And and Dossier was the other band, of course. I forgot to mention them. Yeah, they're excellent.
Yeah,
So
I love
yeah.
Das Ich. That's probably the first German industrial band I ever listened to, I think. Yeah.
Hmm.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, loads of respect for them. All of them were great musicians.
I remember actually when I took German in college, the first course, the professor called me and he's like, "Oh yeah, I call everybody to get to know them." And he's like, "What German music do you listen to?" And I was like, "Das Ich." He's like, "I don't know who that is, but I'll look them up." And I was like, "Okay, I hope you I hope you can survive it." But it's like, old straight edge dude, but
all this brouhaha over Rammstein.
Till.
yeah.
Yeah, this is. I was watching Feely from Germany, her YouTube channel about this. This came out a few days ago. I'm like, wow, that's about to blow up big time.
Yeah, I watched a YouTube video from another German as well, talking
Mhm.
about, I think she's a German expat, but she was
Mhm.
talking about, she wasn't really a fan of Rammstein, but knows Rammstein as a major export of Germany culturally,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and how the fact that this whole situation, the fallout from it, is really hurting Germany.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
really, is it? That's wow, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm old enough now that I am not surprised when any allegations come out against a white man. I kind of have to expect it now unfortunately, of my heroes and my, bands I'm
Mhm.
a fan of or people I look up to. Not like that it's going to happen, but it's not, I've lived in the world long enough to not be surprised anymore.
Apparently, one of the procurers also worked for Marilyn Manson.
Yeah, I read about that too.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
interesting.
Combi Christ, which is
Oh, yeah, there's a combi price connection, right?
yeah. I don't know why
Wow.
anybody hires that dude. Like he posted so much racist shit online and like done.
Oh,
I don't want to
huh.
get into it, but yeah,
Yeah. Mhm.
obviously Rammstein isn't really a goth band. They have
Right.
some crossover with fans and that kind of thing, but I think we have to be having conversations about stuff like feminism because
Mhm.
otherwise in the position that I'm in doing a podcast like this, I do have people contact me about the DJs or promoters or people in the scene that are dudes that are abusers or racists
Mhm.
or that kind of thing that have enough that they don't get called out on it, or it takes a long time, or they're allowed to
Mhm.
perpetuate whatever they're doing.
Yeah, they're so
Yeah.
And
central that people just turn the
yeah,
other way. And
Right.
yeah, and yes, that I feel like in the 2000s, the scene sort of drifted away from any kind of political discussion. Or the early 2000s was when I got into goth, and for all the
Mhm.
intellectualism and that kind of thing that was going on, nobody really talked about political ideology or what goth was supposed to stand for in that sense. And so I feel
Mhm.
like the older goths were not bringing that kind of thing up, and so it sort of became this, well, goth is this apolitical thing, and then when it's apolitical, that just means that bigots are more welcome, and then you have this like sort of neoliberal marketplace of ideas thing where it's like, we're not going to chase you out, we'll debate you about racism or whatever, very different from the punk sort of, if you show up to a punk show and you're a neo-Nazi or something, you're going to get the shit beat out of you.
Mhm.
So I think that caused some damage. Obviously, every scene is different. Every group of people is different. But I am encouraged to continue to see more people talking about those issues and trying to change things. So
Yeah, I am too. I mean, it does need to come out. It's definitely some similar scandals have rocked the LA scene with DJs and whatnot, or just people being roofied at clubs. Like that happens so much.
Oh yeah,
that's awful.
And like it happened here in Fullerton, not a goth club, but a local pub. You know, somebody said they woke up in a parking lot.
Jesus Christ! Yeah,
yeah, with their clothes in disarray.
Yeah,
you know, it's like, gee, you know. I mean, part of me says, well, why aren't your friends looking for you? But I guess they were, and they got spirited out of the club somehow. You know, nobody knows what happened, but
it's so easy to get separated in a club like that. And, you know, unless you have someone who's designated to actually watch you, not just be around and check in every once in a while, but watch you, it's hard to avoid that sort of thing.
I've always had a rule. I never drink at clubs, never, unless it's water.
I don't even drink water most of the time, but
maybe once in a while if I'm really thirsty. But like, I never let people buy me drinks. I never buy drinks. I'm really cheap, so I pregame if I have to. But most of the time, I'm fine being sober, you know, because I have to drive a lot of times. And it's like I have no problems, you know, with that personally. But I know it happened to people that I know. It happened.
Right. Well, I mean, we shouldn't live in a world where women have to forego pleasure and enjoyment for the sake of not being murdered, right?
Yeah, and it has nothing to do with how you're dressed. It's just somebody's a predator and they're going to look for an opportunity.
Yeah, I was actually going to make that comment when you talked about how you used, you know, masculine appearance as sort of a defense mechanism, and I was thinking, that doesn't really stop men. If they have any whiff that you're a woman, they're going to pounce on that sexual harassment thing at the very least.
Well, even
no matter how frumpily you're dressed, and
well, they can't see your form, you know.
Right. If you're totally hiding it,
they would like give me comments about my form, which made me uncomfortable. So if you can't see it, then they can't see anything to comment about, you know. I was thinking, but you're right. It can happen to anyone, and I'm a survivor myself. When I was, I guess I was like 19, 20, when I was sexually assaulted at gunpoint in San Francisco while I was on vacation with a boyfriend. We were staying at a friend's house. The guy broke in with a sawed-off shotgun and held me and him up.
Wow.
So stole money, and then that was my first sexual experience was being raped, which was really awful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have heard similar stories from friends of mine. Very similar
just a complete
stories,
stranger, just, you know, broke in the house. And it changed my life forever. I thought, of course, that he was going to kill us. And so, you know, that's when suddenly this light switched on and I said, gosh, all these, you know, they talk about your life flashing before your eyes. I'm like, life is really precious. Like it gave me an insight. For good or ill, the experience gave me an insight that life is so precious to us. And like, we have to treat our bodies and be so careful, you know, not being a daredevil. Like I like to drive too fast and do stupid things sometimes. And after that, I was like, no, I want to live, you know?
Yeah.
So that was the one takeaway I had, was that I really didn't want to die, you know? And for all the 13-year-old Sylvia Plath reading that I did, you know, and want to die because I was so depressed, because I was, you know, I came from a family where the corporal punishment occurred, and screaming was pretty much the way my parents talked to each other. And, you know, so you get depressed. And it wasn't a condition. It was just a natural reaction to being in that environment, I think. And once I got away from that, I think I, you know, got a better sense of who I was and my place in the world and the place I wanted to carve out for myself, which that's the one thing my mom did give me, was, besides black and blue, was being my own person and not letting anything stop me from what I wanted to do, unless it was something just self-destructive. But, you know, having a business, being in bands, like trying new things, like always, you know, traveling. I traveled alone a lot, which was probably stupid. but I've been to Europe multiple times by myself. I would just go, like, it was 350 round trip to Paris from
Wow.
LAX. So I'm like, okay, 3 days. All right. I'll be back
Yeah.
in 4 days, and just met a lot of people. And I don't know, there was this way that when you live in LA, you walk on the street so that no one fucks with you.
Oh yeah. No,
And I think that's where they
I've
thought I
learned
was a
that as
guy.
well. Yeah, I've
Yeah.
learned that walking around Chicago, walking around New
hmm
York. I've not
hmm
walked LA. I have walked San Fran, but
Yeah,
yeah,
New York.
I totally changed my demeanor, changed how I
hmm
walk, and
Yep.
people just generally leave me alone.
hmm Yep. That's what I had to do. And so, yeah. But it didn't stop me from, having that experience. It didn't stop me from, you know,
There's nothing
trying
that's
to have life's
100%.
adventures. It just
Yep.
made me look a little more carefully at my surroundings, I
Mm.
think.
I mean, that's all you can do is be more aware to
Yeah.
mitigate. You can never 100% avoid it, but
I don't believe in fate or like that life is predestined in any way.
hmm
I think that shit happens, like chaos reigns, and
mhm.
we are just in a world where things happen. And there's no reason why my husband became deaf or I was raped or any other things that happened. There's no reason for it. Things happen and you move on, and that's all you can do. And you can try to learn from it. You try to have a takeaway, and then you try to do whatever you can, to avoid the bad things. But it's not about, oh, what did I do wrong? Or,
Right.
it's just life, you know. And
Yeah, it's
I
not
don't know.
karmic justice. It just happens.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm not even mad about it. I'm just like, okay, this happened to me. I'm very matter of fact.
hmm
Doesn't I'm not emotional about it. It just is. It's like another thing that happened. I've had guns pulled on me.
Hmm.
I've been beat up multiple times especially in the punk scene.
Hmm.
Cops too, by the way.
I would expect
No
nothing
surprise
less.
there.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's I don't know. It makes a good story. That's all I can say. I know it's surprising, but there was a lot of violence in the punk scene, not as much in the goth scene, which I do appreciate
hmm
because I don't like violence at all. And if I can talk my way out of something, I do. I
I'm right there
genuinely
with
do.
you.
Yep.
But yeah, there was people that would just go to shows just to beat people up. And of course, the punks
Yeah.
and the goths somehow got it. I don't know. It was certain people that would go to goth clubs just to find some person to beat up on, which is,
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
but I don't know that happens much anymore. I hope not.
No, I think that was very much a
Yeah, it
product
was a
of the
thing.
70s kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But I'm trying to see if there's any like questions that we missed.
This is an incredible interview.
Oh, thank
Not
you.
an interview, conversation.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
really, really enjoyed this. And I guess I'm grateful that the goth scene can kind of facilitate that openness about philosophy and death and mortality and
Oh,
religious
yes.
abuse and that kind of thing.
Yeah, we need to talk about these things, like especially death, like when they took, having the body at rest in the home away
Yeah.
from people. That
Yeah.
was the bad thing. You did ask about memories about the performances in the shop. Of course, Faith and the Abuse and well, who else? Gosh, a lot of project bands.
Ooh.
Oh, really? You had a lot of
Yeah,
project bands there.
yeah,
Interesting.
'cause Sam's a friend, and
Oh, okay.
yeah. Just about
And I've only
anybody.
met him
Had an
once.
art show with Roz and Eva once. What else? In fact, the alarm got tripped, and the cops that showed up, we go in the back, there's lights off. He comes in with one cop, and another comes in with a torch,
Yeah.
and focuses it on the dried, the cat mummified cat from
Yeah,
the
that's right.
Mhm.
Holy Theater paint
I heard about
on
that.
the wall, and he turns his flashlight towards it, and it's like, this is a scary place.
Yeah.
Yes, I have just won 2 golf points. Yay! Scared
That's
the cop.
amazing.
Not even trying.
That's Roz's mummified cat was there? Is that the one
Yes,
you're
it
referring
was
to?
on
That's
the wall.
amazing.
There were 2 of them.
Oh, there were 2 of them? Oh, wow.
Yes, there were 2 of them. And the one
Oh,
with
man.
Rick's holding was the one he's shown his light onto. Yeah, and Ross did a lot of collages and stuff like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And Eva did some drawings. I don't know if we sold anything, but it was pretty wild. But yeah, there's quite a few. Let's see, Love Spirals played.
Oh, wow.
Lycia, Voltaire's played 3 times.
Voltaire goes everywhere.
He gets around for sure. Yeah.
He's so cool. God, I mean, there's a list on my website. Just tons of bands. I used to have an anniversary every year, and then it stopped with the pandemic, and I haven't restarted it just because it's so much damn work for me.
Yeah.
And I haven't missed all that work.
I can understand that for sure.
Yeah. So I have classes and events, and I guess I didn't talk about that. We have like witchy classes. We have, there's all this stuff on my website, ipso-facto.com. And,
there we go.
All these different things that we do that really isn't goth per se, but it's an interesting side aspect of our business that helps pay the rent,
Yeah.
which keeps going up, and the cost of things. But yeah, it's all this culture. It's the goth culture. We're not just music or fashion. It's all these other pursuits that people have. They're part of what makes the scene what it is that I try to support.
And where, just for anyone who might be in the area or visiting that doesn't know, where is the store located?
The store is located Ipso Facto, 517 North Harbor Boulevard, Fullerton, California, 92832. We're 26 miles south of downtown Los Angeles.
Wonderful. And I think that's a great place to wrap up. So Terri, again, thank you so much for your time and for sharing all your thoughts and stories. This really was a delight for me.
Well,
yeah, absolutely was. It was a joy. Thank you so much.
I enjoyed looking at some of your other interviews too. Or talks, discussions. So I'm glad you enjoyed this one. I certainly enjoyed some of the other ones as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
I love the questions and
sweet.
The conversation very much.
Thank you. That really means a lot. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you.
As we mentioned, Stone 588 is on Spotify and other streaming services. But what I would like to share with you is a track from another project of Terri's called Styrosine FX. She was in the band with Eileen Bowe and Richard King. And I'm going to play the track Cheshire because I think it's very different from what you'll hear with Stone 588, which provides a nice variety. And I personally really enjoy this song as well. I'm really honored to be able to present this, especially considering, as I mentioned, this music is not streaming online. So I hope you enjoy the track. I will be back on the other side. As we wrap up this episode, I maybe have a couple thoughts as I reflect a little bit on what we discussed. I think specifically in relation to feminism, because as I said, when I was getting into goth, I had this expectation that most things were going to be run by women, and that men were free to express femininity. Of course, this was before I understood anything about gender at all, even at a basic level beyond my Christian conservative upbringing. But in thinking about the ways the values of goth have changed over the years and the ways we view what goth is has changed, right? I described my introduction as a focus on academic learning and lots of reading and Gothic literature and discussions of philosophy and metaphysics and spirituality. At some point, goth became conflated with industrial, and synth pop was a big thing. And then, the sort of DIY deathrock ethos came through again and changed things up. And we had period of time where fashion was more important, and a period of time recently when people were talking about goth as only music. And this obviously has varied and changed depending on where you are and what century you're in. We did this review on the Italian goth scene in the early 80s and the variety of perspectives on what goth is. And I think, having actually just seen the Barbie movie, feminism has been on my mind. The idea that Susan Faludi said the core issue of feminism is that women are materially and politically disadvantaged. And I think there's a very real capitalist feminism out there, that sort of girl boss feminism, that sort of association of feminism with major corporations, with consumption, with popularity, and the way that corporations turn very real ideas for material change into slogans and products to make more money. The Barbie movie, even, which I really enjoyed, does poke fun at corporations that commodify radical movements like feminism, by using the language of the movement as a marketing tool in order to make money, all while perpetuating the very system that movement is trying to reform. So they show this in the movie where you have the company board of Mattel are all men, and they're portrayed as only driven by profit margins. So they absorb feminism into a system that benefits the very wealthy by exploiting the very poor. At one point, Ken talks to someone who says, "Oh yeah, our company has lots of progressive values and we are inclusive." And then it comes out that he basically says, "Well, that's not really true. We just hide it very well." And of course, there's a meta irony to this because it's a major blockbuster film that's basically a big commercial for a multi-million, however much money corporation that's selling a product, and again, using the language of feminism for the purpose of making money. That doesn't take the value away from the movie necessarily, right? I do think these leftist ideas around feminism and anti-racism and trans rights have to be in conversation with the economic and material systems that exist and the ways in which we can create change and transgress those systems built to oppress marginalized communities. Personally, I like to quote Angela Davis because she said, essentially, diversity is a corporate strategy. It's a strategy designed to ensure that the institution functions in the same way that it functioned before, except now you have some women and black faces and brown faces. It's a difference that makes no difference at all. The example I always go to is the bisexual female senator in Arizona who was kind of celebrated as a win for women's rights and queer rights when she was elected. And then she went and voted no on the $15 minimum wage. So I think feminism as a radical subversive push to reform the personal in order to topple patriarchal and classic systems, I don't think that is necessarily reflected in the values and systems in Goth, in mass, taken holistically. But I think it could be. And I'm sure there are places where it is. And if anything, I hope the whole zeitgeist of Goths going to see Barbie that has been happening online for the last couple weeks will get more of us reading and thinking about feminism and classism. So thank you for indulging my little post-show thoughts here. Our next episode is going to be another music mausoleum. So we'll be reviewing the new album from Voina, the side project of Pier from the Golden Apes, and we'll be sharing some recommendations for new releases as well as sharing Obscura Undead's All Goth Considered. And before we go, let me just thank you for spending time with us. We are spoiled for choice when it comes to how we spend our time and what content is out there and what we decide to give our attention to. And I cannot express in words how grateful I am that you've chosen to spend your time listening to this podcast. So thank you so much for that. And thank you to everyone as well who supports us on Patreon, an even bigger commitment. If you find value in this show and you would like to get little extra bonuses and just help us perpetuate the show and keep it going, you can head over to patreon.com/Cemetery Confessions. So thank you again for spending your time with us. And until next time, stay dark.
The preceding program is a member of the Belfry, a network of blogs, podcasts, and videos for the darkly inclined. Go to thebelfry.rip for more information.